world economy of the 21st century is very different from what we saw in the 20th century. The axis of globalized economic power has shifted considerably. Just about all of the rich industrialized countries that have been the past drivers of the world economy, the United States, the Western European economies, and Japan, now seem to be struggling. We indeed now fear their weaknesses much more than we ever feared their strength. On the other hand, nearly all of the emerging market economies, especially China, but also India, the rest of Asia, Latin America, and even Africa and the Middle East, despite the recent disruptions, are booming. Though through the optic of purchasing power parity, these developing countries now account for 1/2 of the world economy. They have provided 3/4 of all global growth over the past decade. They're growing 3 times as fast as the industrialized developed countries. Minimum 6% growth as compared to a 2% growth. Hence, their global share is rising substantially every year and will reach at least 2/3 over the next decade. 8 of these countries have now joined what we call the $1 trillion club, with national economic output exceeding $1 trillion, such as China, India, Russia, Brazil, Korea, Mexico, Turkey, and Indonesia. They play an increasingly decisive role in the world economic sphere. Ladies and gentlemen, if we turn the page to Indonesia, the country has just recovered its priced investment grade status from Fitch after 14 years. The move crowns nearly a decade of steady economic growth and improvement in Indonesia, which had been downgraded to junk at the peak of the Asian financial crisis in 1997, at which time the country seemed politically and economically moribund. This upgrade will surely help close the gap between Indonesia and the so-called BRIC nations made up of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. This will also reflect the country's strong and resilient economic growth, low and declining public debt ratios, strengthened external liquidity, and a prudent overall macro policy framework. Indonesia in 2011 also saw its best performance in the last 5 years, with a GDP growth of 6.5%. Interestingly, the manufacturing sector grew at a rate of 6.6%, thereby exceeding national economic growth. This was made possible due to an increase in investment activities in the manufacturing sector. With a population of over 240 million people and a rich supply of natural resources, Indonesia certainly becomes an increasingly attractive market for both domestic and international investments. Total investment in 2011 was around $27 billion, with more than 4,000 projects across the country. As for trade, we were also able to exceed the export target of $200 billion US, within which our trade with India has also reached a new historic level of around $17 billion US. This performance has led the Asian Development Bank to conclude that there is room for growth even more in 2012, in which they're all predicting for Indonesia to enjoy a slightly more economic sizing in 2012. The Indonesian economy is also undergoing major structural transformation, driven by favorable demographics, with which Indonesia's population has a good chunk of its population made up of people under the age of 30 years old. Also, we're seeing rising per capita income and facilitated macroeconomic and sectoral policies. This is reflected by, among others, the issuance of the long-awaited regulation on tax holidays, on tax allowances, as well as a new law on the acquisition of land, which we believe will catalyze the infrastructure development in Indonesia going forward. Nonetheless, no matter how prudent the country handles its fiscal and monetary system and how robust the trade and investment are, it is my view that we cannot decouple from the global economic slowdown.